Welcome to rebelastrology.blogspot.com. I'm your rebel astrologer, A. Drobny, and let's get right into it this time. There's something going on in the sky right now pretty big deal. Probably hear about a little bit on the news. There is a partial eclipse going on June 21st, 22nd, if you're in certain parts of the world. If you want the exact time of the closest part of what we as astrologers would call a solar-lunar conjunction for the tightest part. You can find that on the blog where this is posted on at rebelastrology.blogspot.com. But let's talk about the meaning of that and get into it a little bit. Keep in mind that while the exact conjunction is happening at a very specific time and the manifestation in the sky, what you see is happening in a time frame, the conjunction, as far as how we read it as astrologers, lasts for a longer period and takes effect for several days. Now, in order to kind of get a feel of this, we have to talk about what is the sun and what is the moon. And in order to do that, I'd like to turn to something maybe a little bit more primal than the standard Greco-Roman mythology that I oftentimes turn to. Not saying that it's not very worthy, but when we think about the moon and the sun, we're talking about things that we've been looking at long before maybe the first bodies in the sky that we were really paying attention to. And to do that, I'd like to go back and look at what we would call the Egyptians, and they would call themselves the Kemets. Egypt, the word Egypt comes from a Greek word for the Egyptians, which means land of the burnt skin, whereas Kemet is what they called themselves. And I always find it polite to address people the way they present themselves. At anywho, when we look at what we're talking about in terms of Egyptian mythology, we're looking at the sun god Ra and the moon god Thoth. There are other versions, but those are the ones I want to talk about. And when you look at the Kemetic mythology, you're really going back to something that, although it got standardized later, starts out in many real senses from a much more shamanistic point of view. It's why you have animal-headed goddesses. In some respects, these were considered, in addition to planets or ideas, these were the spirits of an animal of sorts. Ra, at one point, transitions into a formalized god, but originally is kind of the spirit of the hawk and the sun. And likewise, Thoth is the spirit of the ibis and the moon. The ibis is a now extinct bird that lived along the Nile River and had a long spouty beak that resembled the crescent of the moon when it's in its crescent form. And what's interesting about the moon and about Thoth is that Thoth, among many other duties, he was considered kind of a god of wisdom, a god of magic, a god that knew many things. He was the navigator of the sun chariot, which was Ra's, the sun god, the hawk. Now, the hawk gets associated with the sun in many ways because he would soar above the land in midday because, if you know anything about birds of prey, they can use less energy because the heat wafting up off of the desert helps keep them afloat. And they can conserve energy that way and kind of survey the land looking for their prey. Oddly enough, like humans, one of the few animals that was known to be a daytime predator. There you go. And at any rate, what I want to come back to is this understanding that the moon, in its own way, guides the sun. In astrology, the sun is our ego identity, right? It is that piece that defines us, that we say, this is who I am, right? In a broad sense. Everything else is part of how we do or what we do, the sun really encapsulates how we conceptualize ourselves, which is affected by everything else, because we are a whole person who is not just an ego identity. We are also our concepts of beauty, Venus, or pleasure, Venus, our concepts of, or the way we think about things, and the way we pass information and communicate, Mercury, the way we go after things, what drives us, Mars, the way that we connect to the universe in an expansive sense, the way we look to horizons and gain a sense of adventure, look into ourselves and try to expand, Jupiter, the boundaries we put on our world, Saturn, and likewise, the sun is our identity, and the moon is the reflection of that divine Ra, that divine identity as it's cast out in the world. That's our emotions. And our emotions are an amazing thing, because they're what allow us to understand ourselves, not in an intellectual way, but understand how we're fitting into the world, how we are expressing our identity in the world, and how that feels. And let's go back to, you go back to Thoth and you realize that the moon is guiding our sun chariot. When something feels bad, or we feel angry or sad, or we know it's because our chariot is a little bit off course, right? It's just a gauge. We don't obsess about our emotions. We note them. We recognize them, and then we say, now what course feels better than the course we're on? It's kind of simple. We just make an adjustment. Now, what's going on right now is when the moon and the sun come into conjunction, or when anything comes into conjunction, it's the two energies, they both merge, but also it's a chance to reset and rebalance each other with the universe in terms of the other energy. And the grand thing about a solar-lunar conjunction is that it is a time for us to recalculate how we see ourselves in a very direct way with how we feel, to take real stock of our emotions. And that is the grand, wonderful prospect that I put before you today. Now, this is all happening in Gemini in terms of tropical astrology, which is what I use. There's also sidereal astrology, which refers to the physical stars in the sky. Now this is really complicated, and every once in a while you'll hear someone who thinks they're debunking astrology trot out that that's not physically where it is. That's true. We have a standardized regions of the sky that we read from, so that we don't have to go back and refigure in the progression of the ages every time we read a chart. And if you want more information about that, I will probably follow up with a blog about that one of these days. But let's get back to where we were. So these two bodies are coming into conjunction, and they're doing so in Gemini. So the thrust of what's going on, we also have, first we have the duality of I am and I feel, and those are coming into alignment. And Gemini is the house of duality. It's also, in as much, the house that rules over how we deal with humans we don't know very well. It's kind of part of the duality of Gemini is I am and I am observed, and I observe being observed. It's that duality of how people approach us. It's the day house of Mercury. It's about how we present ourselves. And how we present ourselves is so much more important to the people we we don't know very well, you know, because anyone else that we do know very well, you know, we get below that. And so what's going on right now in a lot of ways is we're looking at how we present our identity to others and how we feel and the results we get and how that they feel. We're kind of looking at that and thinking about it. And it's a grand time to do it. It's not the time necessarily to go out charging, but it is the time to just kind of reassess, and the possibilities that we get going down the road from a good readjustment right now can be astounding, because at the end of the day, this allows us to understand the road we're going and get better results, right? It's about clarifying the big word, our intentions, clarifying what we want, what we really want, what we want in us in terms of who we are, and holding on to that, being who we are and holding on to that. Now, at the same time, these bodies are trining, which is a soft aspect that flows easily one to the other. Saturn in its T-square that we've discussed several times, but Saturn in Libra. And Libra is the house of our romantic relationships and how we deal with people on a one-on-one and also in kind of formalized relationships between two people. And what Saturn speaks to is our limits and our boundaries. And right now, those boundaries being set by Saturn in that is giving real strength and security. What we have in our personal relationships can lend kind of a hand, even though in some ways it can also feel a little tight. But if we're on top of it and doing the work of being there day to day, secret of Saturn, being in the moment, paying attention to where you step slowly but surely, it all works out, doesn't it? It's kind of neat. This gives us the support to go back and look at how we're presenting ourselves to the world. So I would turn to those people who are closest to us, and we know that we have that support and that strong basis, and then we look deep into our lives and check out how we feel. And if we're feeling a little off right now, it's just a matter of replotting our course. And so that's the astrology for now. And you can follow us on Twitter at Rebel Astrologer, at Rebel Astrologer. You can email us with questions or to get one of those wonderful personal readings by emailing me, rebelastrologer@gmail.com. You can friend us on Facebook. If you look up Rebel Astrology, you can find it there. Also go and check out the written material at rebelastrology.blogspot.com. And there is currently a competition for a free personalized reading that you may actually access from anywhere in the world if you have IM, anywhere in the country, or IM or Skype video phone, or you can access, anywhere in the United States if you got a phone. But until next week, look deep, look hard, embrace love, because with all of its pieces and all of its parts, with all the planets representing all the parts of us, we're just a love machine, and we don't work for anybody but us.